On September 9th, the critical Kursk Nuclear Power Plant is currently under a significant attack.
Hey everyone, check this out guys, this is indeed good morning, Dick.
Russia blew up the transformer in Kurchatov itself, a provocation to blame Ukraine. Everything is on fire. Moscow and St. Petersburg are in a panic. At the same time, explosions are thundering near Moscow and St. Petersburg in the Leningrad region. Road junctions have been blown up. The Syzran oil refinery is on fire.
Something's not shooting, it's just illnesses.
That's it.
It started. That's it.
Ust-Luga is in flames. The airports in Moscow and St. Petersburg are paralyzed.
The vibrant youth. And damn.
In Crimea, trains carrying military equipment have been blown up. We'll discuss all this with top analyst Oleksandr Demchenko right now.
Looks like we're about to get kicked off the construction site. That's it, the tank cars have caught fire too. Hope nothing blows up again now.
Well, friends, today the skies over Russia have lit up with new explosions. Moscow, St. Petersburg, explosions, they're paralyzed. The airports Sheremetyevo, Vnukovo and Pulkovo have stopped operating because explosions are going off everywhere. There's a fire in the Kaluga region. The Syzran oil refinery is on fire. The strategic port of Ust-Luga has been attacked. The Novatek gas terminal has simply been blown up. The Kremlin's energy empire is collapsing right before our eyes.
I think regarding the terminal, the chassis aren't exactly top-notch either. Right now, it's holding together with some kind of makeshift fix.
Important facilities at the oil refinery in Vashtinsk have been attacked. It's been burning for 3 days now. Everyone there is sobbing and crying. Attacked gas terminals, infrastructure, railway junctions, and aviation collapse in Moscow and even in St. Petersburg. There's panic. Airports have been shut down. We'll discuss all this with the well-known top analyst Oleksandr Demchenko. Sasha, welcome.
Hello, Dasha. Hello, everyone. All right, Dasha, let's get started.
Friends, please write a few kind words in the comments to support Ukraine. Glory to the armed forces of Ukraine. And we'll start with the explosions. It's been a while since anything hit Moscow or St. Petersburg. So there's panic in St. Petersburg, airports are shut down, and the largest gas processing plant in Europe is on fire. Now it will be difficult for the Kremlin not only to wage war, but also to trade fuel. Sasha, how do you assess today's strikes?
This is really a blow, right in the gut. Ukraine continues to destroy the energy sectors of the Russian Federation. We're not just saying this lightly. This is some kind of gas terminal, the Novatek station. Yes, the terminal has been destroyed. Listen, an enterprise has been destroyed, a facility belonging to Gennady Timchenko. Let's call things by their proper names. Gennady Timchenko is one of Putin's closest oligarchs. He sponsors Putin, builds him various factories, ships, even palaces in Gelendzhik, together with the Rotenbergs. Gennady Timchenko is Putin's closest friend when it comes to hockey and everything else. So a direct strike has already been carried out. In other words, they are striking at Putin, at his inner circle, at his oligarchs. Not at some imaginary figures, not at oligarchs who were once close to Putin, but directly at Putin's closest entourage. Today, there was a strike. Furthermore, we must not forget that, as I see it, a transformer was damaged near the Kursk Nuclear Power Plant. So these are not just strikes on the energy sector in general. What did Putin recently say through Rod Alexandrov to Lukashenko? Yes, with the help of the RTA. That Russia was preparing strikes, with Putin simply agitating to strike at the Yorishniks on Bankova. Yes, that happened, it did. Lukashenko made that statement a couple of days ago, he did. It's a kind of blackmail, They were sending messages from the Kremlin through Lukashenko saying, we can go all the way, we can escalate, we can go all in. Well, there you go. You're blackmailing with nuclear fallout. You're constantly staging provocations at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. There you have it. But I'm more than sure, Darsh, that in reality it wasn't even Ukraine that struck the Kursk nuclear power plant. Once again, it's Putin, his troops, his army, just like they did with the airports you asked about. Yes, let's not forget. The Vnukovo strike, a missile strike, a Ukrainian drone is shot down by an anti-missile, and it basically falls on people. A Ukrainian drone, shot down by a Russian anti-missile, falls just 200 meters from the terminal. And now they're bombing the entire Kursk region with their guided aerial bombs from the air. I mean, the Russian army, the armed forces, the air force, they bombed and bombed, wiped the Kursk region off the face of the earth. They wiped it out. And are they still wiping out the Kursk region? How is it that they still can't drive out the Ukrainian soldier completely? They keep wiping the Kursk region off the map, just turning it to dust, destroying their own people. and a Russian missile hit the nuclear power plant. Putin is striking. He's the only one doing it. Is this because of incompetence? Or is it because someone wants to stage a nuclear provocation, blame everything on Ukraine, carry out a massive terrorist attack, provoke Trump and say to him, look at what's happening. Here are our energy facilities. Here are our nuclear sites. What kind of negotiations can there be? Maybe this is partly a plan to disrupt negotiations with Ukraine, negotiations that Putin never intended to enter into and still doesn't?
Yes, that's absolutely right. But in reality, they are the ones striking. With the Kursk Nuclear Power Plant, they're deliberately creating a precedent claiming Ukraine struck it. This has already been reported, including by the Center for Countering Disinformation, which stated this is the work of the Russians. They strike themselves, then accuse Ukraine. Well, now let's talk about where we are striking. So, Sasha, I looked into it. Magyar has prepared a whole list for Independence Day of what we've been doing lately. By the way, this is actually important. We've been striking oil refineries, and almost all of them in the European part of Russia have been attacked. And Magyar made a statement about this. The former Medvedchuk oil refinery in Novoshaktinsk has been burning for over 60 hours. Over 60 hours, Carl. Next, on August 14th, we hit the Lukoil Volgograd refinery, then Druzhba. The Hungarians say that restoring the pipeline will take about 5 days. There is no confirmation of a restart, Magyar writes. On August 20th, the oil refinery, the Novoshaktinsk oil products plant, then Druzhba, then what's called the refinery Magyar, we're blowing everything up, go home, Russians, that's what Magyar reports. Well, and now as I understand it, today we attacked, among other targets, the Syzran oil refinery and the port at the same time. Sasha, lately we've been hitting oil refineries very intensively. What do you think is the reason for this? Because for a while this wasn't happening.
Rostov, Saratov, Ryazan. We just need to keep adding to this huge list of oil refineries and stations that come to mind now, which Ukraine, its armed forces, and its special services are destroying or significantly damaging. Let's not forget that just the SBU under Vasil Malyuk has taken out over 200 Russian targets, not only energy facilities, but also defense-related ones. And other intelligence agencies, both military and foreign, have also made a huge contribution to this effort. But what does this tell us? Look, right now, there are just massive lines stretching along the roads in Russia. Trucks are lined up, cars are lined up, everyone is searching for gasoline. In 3 regions of Russia, excluding the occupied Ukrainian Crimea, although there's an energy crisis there too, the fuel crisis has already reached as far as the Kuril Islands. And I've been saying this since April. I've been saying all along, look, Russia is about to face an energy catastrophe. There will be a fuel crisis. Get ready. Go ahead, gather up some plastic bottles, collect any kind of metal cans, anything you can use to store gasoline. Well, now they're giving out 10 liters per coupon. But what is 10 liters for a truck? It's nothing. That's just enough to drive a little and then stop again until the next gas station, if you're lucky. That's why there's a fuel crisis in Russia right now. What did Ukraine do? Ukraine deliberately started striking energy facilities. Putin's moratorium isn't being observed at all. Ukraine began targeting energy facilities successfully. Oil and processing plants have come to a halt. Friends, for those who don't understand, I'm just explaining what this means. So, look, everyone is used to thinking that the Russian oil sector, or let's say the energy sector, is all about profits from gas and oil sales. Friends, do you know what a gas station is? A filling station. Let me explain it to you. When you buy a liter of gasoline, 60% of the price is excise tax. It's a tax. Now imagine if none of that tax revenue existed. That 3 regions are already not paying taxes. That all of this is collapsing, and the Russian Federation is facing major economic problems. Putin has big problems. He doesn't have money for the war. And Ukraine is doing everything to make him exhaust his last reserves and force him to go to those damn negotiations with Zelensky. But this time to real negotiations, to negotiations where he has to make concessions. Negotiations without ultimatums, without threats, without blackmail, and without those stinking manipulations with Anchorage up to this day. Just normal business-like negotiations about the future. And not about the future of Ukraine, but about the future of the region. Because Ukraine is striking Russian energy facilities. Because Ukraine, which is defending its own territory, has seen Russia advance over the past years by only 1% of what was possible. This is what President Zelensky said today. Because Ukraine, which over the past year or a full year and a half has diligently developed the formidable Flamingo missile, the powerful Sarmat missile, the long-range Neptune missile, and the regular yet effective Neptune, is decisively flipping this entire board to hell and emphatically showing both the Kremlin, the autocratic Putin, and his entire corrupt entourage. All his well-fed, immensely wealthy oligarchs who consistently keep funneling him vast sums of money every single time to him and his immediate family for their continued existence, their absolute power, their luxurious lives. Look, guys, we can absolutely do this even without significant American help. We can certainly do it entirely on our own. We can do it ourselves, we can strike like this, and we will strike. First it was drones, and soon there will be missiles. And I'm not saying this to call for anything. It's just a fact. That's all it is. Ukraine has developed, Ukraine has tested, Ukraine is already striking, Ukraine has the strongest drone program, and Ukraine will have the strongest missile program, with or without American help. And what are they all going to do about it? That's a big question for Russia. And Putin will have to answer that question very soon. He won't answer, but things will get tougher, because gifts like today, Dasha, these kinds of gifts will happen more and more often, every time, every month, more and more frequently. It won't just be Russia striking Ukraine. Ukraine will strike back because we're all just completely fed up at this point with what Putin and his troops are doing.
Sasha, I really like the situation with the series of strikes on the Druzhba pipeline. In this way, we are systematically destroying the Druzhba oil pipeline, which today supplies oil to our two so-called friends, Slovakia and Hungary, who are blocking, especially Hungary, Ukraine's entry into the European Union. And as for the pipeline itself, I'll just keep Arctic level silence. And I really liked how Peter Seater, I think it was yesterday, wrote a post saying, how is it that Ukraine is attacking the Druzhba oil pipeline? How dare they? To which all the European leaders, well, many of them replied, well, just as you show solidarity with the European Union, we are equally as much in solidarity with you. And I think the Ukrainian ambassador to South Africa wrote that solidarity and Hungary are like goulash vegetarianism. In other words, they totally trolled the Hungarians. What can be said about our strikes on the Druzhba oil pipeline?
Look, it's clear that Orban is furious. Orban is furious because he gets a huge percentage, I think about 10% of all Russian oil transit. Viktor Orban is making money off the transit, basically sitting on the pipeline. Just like, by the way, many others did. Yanukovych sat on the pipeline. Many people here sat on the pipeline, remember? Medvedchuk and so on. Orban is sitting on the pipeline in Hungary. There you go. He gets a huge percentage. Orban, well, as people say, is that true or is it just a rumor? We don't know. We don't have any documents in hand. No one has seen them. No one has held them, so to speak. Maybe just a few select people. Orban, as people have been saying for a long time, was recruited by the Russian, or rather Soviet KGB back in the late 80s. That's why he's been on the take for a long time. He's been, excuse the expression, it's a bit crude, but he's been feeding off Putin, the FSB, and Lubyanka for ages. So everything is clear here. Yes, Ukraine is hitting back at a friendship that is becoming more and more, day by day, unfriendly. Right? But is there really a question about Russian transit? And is there really a question that Hungary and Slovakia, especially Hungary, cannot accept, coordinate, or agree to anti-Russian measures and sanctions? And this is solely because Russia supplies Hungary with energy. But let's take this disgrace off the table. If it's all about the oil, well, fine, then let's remove the oil. Then you will let Ukraine into the European Union. Then you will give Ukraine all the necessary weapons. Then you will impose sanctions against the Russian Federation. Or maybe it's not about the oil, but rather about the pledge you signed, Viktor Orban, many, many years ago, by giving your consent to act as an agent or employee of the former Soviet KGB. So what is the real problem? Or is it that Hungary, Viktor, and specifically Orban's government maintain their entire entourage and apparatus with Russian and Putin's money, the money of Putin's oligarchs? And in this way, they live a normal, good, happy life. And by the way, he is directly stirring up the Ukrainian Transcarpathia, for which Orban has had his own separate plans for a long time, and who, behind Ukraine's back, made deals with Putin at the beginning of the invasion about the partition of the Ukrainian state. Or have we forgotten about that? Or have we forgotten the letters from the State Duma of the Russian Federation back in 2014, including to Hungary, where there was a proposal to officially divide Ukraine into several parts? Have we forgotten that? You know what I like next in all of this, in this whole situation with Orban? I liked Trump's reaction. As strange as that may sound, Trump wrote there, he printed it out, whether it was a letter or some kind of printed message, or maybe it was a tweet. Who knows what it was from Orban? But Trump made a note there, you see. I am very angry, you know? I am very angry. It's unbearable for me to listen to all of this. He passes it on through Vavak, saying that I'm their friend. What was Trump's reaction after that? None. He called Zelensky. He passed something on to Ukraine. The State Department issued some kind of note. Did he start blackmailing Ukraine live on air or making some kind of threats? No. Trump did nothing. Just as, by the way, he also did nothing about the destroyed American, or rather damaged American electronics plex company plant in Mukachevo, which was hit by Putin. What about security guarantees, Donald? Where there is an American investor, where there is an American factory, Putin did not strike. He struck again yet another time, because let's be honest, since 2014, Putin has repeatedly targeted American factories. He has targeted Polish factories as well. The country of Chernatna. Poland doesn't really like to respond either, right? Now, drones are flying in as close as 100 kilometers from Warsaw, and Poland still has, these big, how do they put it? My God, tell me, Dasha, they're very concerned,
Deeply, yes.
Deeply concerned. They are deeply discouraged and concerned about what happened. And Trump is deeply concerned too, and nothing happens. But the key thing I want to say is that apparently Ukraine, Zelensky, decided to take matters into their own hands. We've probably all heard this statement today in the Sharp magazine. We don't know if it's true or not. Listen, the American publication is playing its own game too. They're also divided into certain factions, into certain clans. There are certain moneybags behind them. They have their own story over there. Today, the Sharp magazine published a very interesting piece where they said that, yes, on one hand, Ukraine is receiving over 800 missiles. Short range up to 400 kilometers. But on the other hand, Donald Trump and directly the Department of Defense. It's the same official who recently blocked the supply of weapons, shells, missiles, and so on to Ukraine, as you may recall. Then they had to urgently unblock it in an emergency mode. So, today we learned that, as it turns out, Trump's America, the Trump administration, and the Pentagon blocked Ukraine from striking deep into Russia with ATACMS missiles and the British-French Storm Shadow missiles because their use is regulated and coordinated directly by US space intelligence. Space intelligence transmits the coordinates. Accordingly, Ukraine and Zelensky have probably finally broken away and realized that, yeah, you can't have any dealings with this guy. All these collective efforts are in vain. You have to rely on yourself, just like Israel does, and like many, many other countries. That's why missile programs are being developed successfully. I'm sure there are already at least 10 other Ukrainian missile projects in development, and soon we'll hear about them. Even now, significant strikes are being carried out against Putin's closest circle. Even now, we are completely undermining the situation inside the Russian Federation from within. Isn't that right? Because all these strikes have a direct impact on the political segment, on the political situation, on public sentiment, on Russia's economy, and on the social situation, because it's the ordinary people who suffer. They're the ones buying gasoline at the gas stations, while the Russian army gets its fuel from Putin. And all of Putin's Oruses are fueled up, just as they should be. It's the ordinary people who suffer. So everything is happening just as it was basically planned. Everything is moving along as expected, and it's all completely logical. And to be honest, these are good news on August 24th, 2025. There haven't been good news for a long time. At last, we finally heard at least something. Sasha!
It's very important to me. You and I remember when there was the Navy Day parade in St. Petersburg.
Do you call that a parade?
Well, that's trolling, of course. A festive explosion in the territory of Petersburg and the Leningrad region, thanks to our drones. And now they've attacked again, which means Petersburg and the Leningrad region, a magical place for Putin, have been hit. Don't you think this is symbolic, right? Because for Putin, Petersburg is a sacred city, and today the airport in St. Petersburg is completely closed and there are drones flying there. I already checked this morning before our streams that a couple of drones, due to the actions of Russian air defense, flew into apartments in Petersburg. Sasha?
Well, look, this is a clear signal that the range is already quite good. If earlier Ukraine could only reach its own occupied territories at the beginning of the war, then later it was the border regions of the Russian Federation, and we saw this for quite a long time. Then there were isolated long-range strikes, sort of test runs, attempts aimed at Tatarstan. You saw that. But after there were already special operations on the territory of Siberia, after Ukraine started striking, well, reaching such distant regions as Irkutsk Oblast, for example, and so on, beyond the Urals, reaching the Urals, then we can say that yes, Ukraine is signaling to Moscow that the range has changed, and that Ukraine is acquiring the capabilities and means to destroy any target, no matter how well protected it is, no matter what kind of rocks these mega bunkers are hidden in on Russian territory. Dash. There's one very interesting detail I'd like to discuss, because missile strikes are missile strikes, but you can't talk about that for the entire broadcast. But look, right now some very interesting things are happening in Russia, just really interesting things. A decision was made in the Kremlin. I'm absolutely serious. I'm not trolling right now. I'm speaking in all seriousness. A decision was made in the Kremlin that the Russian police are not coping and will not be able to cope directly with the so-called special military operation veterans. And that order in local areas, in cities, and in the regions of Russia should, in part, be maintained by the Russian army, since it directly oversees and coordinates all these scoundrels who took up guns for money and went to kill Ukrainians, both civilians and military. Disgusting. A question arises. If they are planning to hand this over to the army, and if the army will be restoring order on the streets of Russian cities, does this mean, first of all, that Putin will bring troops into Moscow and St. Petersburg? First of all. Second, does this mean that over time the Russian army will gain and continue to gain more and more power in Russia, and that the generals will become bloated with power, that this is, a kind of safety cushion in case the war ends, or if we freeze it, stop it, yes, in one form or another. But at the same time, you get money because the army is deployed on the streets of Russian cities and regions. So, does this mean that the generals will become even more influential? Third, does this mean that an inevitable conflict between the FSB and the military generals is coming? And it will happen. Fourth, does this basically mean that then we will gradually see a military coup or a move toward a military coup in Russia, Moscow, the Kremlin, Putin? Will this actually happen? Because you see, this has already happened in Russian history, in the history of the Soviet Union, in the history of Moscow, when the generals removed an unwanted general secretary. This has happened before. Or more precisely, not even a general secretary, but someone who very much wanted to become one. Let me remind you of the story of Beria and Zhukov. Isn't that right? How Khrushchev came to power, how the rest of the trio emerged. Zhukov came in and restored order. And Beria was eliminated. So all of this in its entirety is truly inevitable. And if this significant development is indeed happening, it profoundly means that it's not merely Putin who is attempting to preserve some crucial cash flows for his high-ranking generals. This is truly a major concern for the Kremlin, for Putin, and for his inner circle. That a huge number of people will get their hands on weapons, that regions will thus become isolated from Russia, that a major redistribution of property will begin in the Russian Federation, and that not just the 90s will return, but something even worse. God knows what years will come, that there will be major coups, major uprisings, major armed rebellions. And Putin won't be able to handle all of this. He needs the army. But there's always the threat that this army could overthrow Putin in the coming years as soon as he stops the war. These are the questions that need to be felt and analyzed right now. So what's already happening with us? So, Hinstein has appeared. Hinstein has appeared. In Rio, the governor, or already the governor? Yes, he is already the governor of the Kursk region. Attacks on the Kursk Nuclear Power Plant are a threat to nuclear safety and cross all boundaries of international conventions. In short, they are disrupting the negotiations. Yes, they didn't know how to get out of Trump's proposal to hold one-on-one negotiations between Zelensky and Putin. They didn't know how to make sure that Putin wouldn't go anywhere. They couldn't figure out how to create a situation where Trump would get angry at Ukraine and bypass the Europeans. They didn't understand how to knock out all these trump cards in general. So did they just go all in? Their last trump card is nuclear, so you can see it that way. By rejecting Trump, they can prolong the pause, keep pretending, keep going. They can keep negotiating with the Americans, keep squeezing things out of them. At the same time, they can demand other concessions, threaten Ukraine with Orsha and everything else, and now they're starting to deploy weapons on the territory of Belarus. Even because of that, look, we can see how Putin is now disrupting the negotiations. This is a breakdown of negotiations. I'm telling you, this is a breakdown of negotiations. That's it. The Kursk Nuclear Power Plant incident is a breakdown of negotiations. That's exactly what they needed. And notice, they're doing this in Kursk. They're not doing it in other regions, not even in other parts of Russia, right? They're doing it in Kursk, where they don't care anymore.
And now here's video evidence that everything Hinstein said is a lie. Let's watch.
Good morning. I want to reassure you. Everything is fine in Kurchatov. Everything is calm. There is no fire at the moment. Well, there was some noise at night. Something popped, something flared up. But they put it out quickly. Right now, everything is safe. Birds are flying. The weather is gorgeous, sunny. Peace and kindness to everyone.
Rashid himself confirmed that something happened there, as you heard, using absolutely inappropriate language. I won't even repeat it. So, Sasha, what is this?
It's a provocation. It's the same tires at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that weren't set on fire, let me remind you. It's the same kind of story. So they provoked something small so as not to make too much noise, so there wouldn't be an explosion, so as not to repeat Chernobyl, right? Which, by the way, they themselves carried out here on Ukrainian territory once upon a time. And they kept silent about that disaster. For a huge number of days, they simply concealed it. So this is a provocation. This isn't an attempt, it's the disruption of negotiations. Listen, these things are just obvious. They staged the provocation themselves, carried it out themselves, and then discussed it themselves. Then they'll tell Trump that this is what happened and that they can't tolerate it anymore. There will be no more negotiations. Everything is ruined and Ukraine is to blame for everything. They're the ones doing all of this because they have no room to maneuver, but they need to either enter negotiations or not. If they don't, there will be some consequences. It's necessary to make sure there are no consequences. It's important to give Trump completely accurate information about how things could be. So that Trump would come out with some kind of angry tweet. By the way, I wouldn't be surprised if he does come out with some kind of angry tweet. But Dasha, what's the most important thing? What's the most important thing? The most important thing is this. No matter how hard all these Russian security officials try, no matter what they do, Putin has a huge pile of problems. But Putin can't wage this war forever. Putin doesn't have the money for this war. He is becoming heavily dependent on many other players. It's gotten to the point where he's more dependent on North Korea than on the Russian defense industry. He can no longer wage a war of this intensity. A war, and he needs to bring it to an end. If he thinks he can win the war in the last few months he has left, to somehow win this or turn the situation in his favor, he is gravely mistaken because his generals, the traitor generals, Gerasimov betrayed him a long time ago. He gives him completely inaccurate, unnecessary, and absolutely false information. There's nothing there, no significant progress, nothing colossal. 1% over all these years. 1. Yes. And the American Institute for the Study of War states the following. At the current accelerated pace, it would take Putin and his army 99 years to take all of Ukraine. Putin won't live that long. That's clear to everyone. And I think that whoever comes after Putin, or whoever rules Russia together with him, won't live long enough to fulfill all these pipe dreams either. So listen, they're deliberately provoking a strike. This has happened before. It has happened. On the territory of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, they made a mess at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant when they started this whole bloody mess, under the name of a full-scale invasion. They've already staged provocations in the Kursk region, near the Kursk nuclear power plant. All of this has happened before, but now there's a specific target. There's only one target. To get Trump out of Ukraine, to finish what they started, the so-called special operation, and moreover, to squeeze some extra perks out of the Americans and make sure that the idea of a meeting between Putin and Zelensky never even crosses Trump's mind. That's the only thing they want. They don't need anything else.
Yes, Sasha, that's true. That's their strategy because yesterday, on the eve of Ukraine's Independence Day, Trump made a statement saying that in 2 weeks, he'll handle it. Sanctions and tariffs, he used those two terms, or he'll just walk away and say, this isn't my war. And most likely, Putin is counting on the second option for Trump. Sasha, so I definitely wanted to ask about Putin. I have a question about him for the end, but now I want to talk about the logistics of the paralysis of the sky and about the railway hubs and how much all of this is affecting the Russians. Right now, everyone is reporting that Pulkovo, Sheremetyevo, and Vnukovo have been shut down because of drones. This is a new standard of risk for Russia. Next, the railway hubs and stations. So right now, we've basically created railway collapses. Paralysis, for example, yesterday for 2 days straight, racists couldn't buy tickets. They were crowding at the railway hubs. They can't do anything. In your opinion, how realistic is it without bravado? Strikes deep in the rear. Moscow, St. Petersburg, aviation collapses, railway collapses. These demoralize the elites and the population. And how could this actually affect Putin and speed up the negotiation agenda for the Kremlin, or on the contrary?
The elites are not demoralized. There's no need to indulge in any illusions here. For one simple reason, the elite, the real elite, have their own business jets. Granted, there are some fuel issues, but there's enough fuel for this elite. They have business jets. This greatly demoralizes the Russian people. The average Russian, the one who votes for Putin and is told that everything is fine, that everything is calm in Magadan, that the war hasn't come to Moscow, it's already arrived. in both Moscow and St. Petersburg. Look, Dasha, all of Russia is Moscow-centric. You've noticed, haven't you, that those lines for gasoline on the highway start from Moscow, through Rostov, through Krasnodar. Everything goes through Moscow. All supplies go through Moscow. The entire railway system is centered in Moscow. All air transportation is routed through Moscow, both civil and commercial. Everything is centered on Moscow. If you destroy the node or nodes that connect to Moscow, the most important ones, that's it, there's nothing left. That's when a passenger transportation and food supply collapse begins. That's when a trade collapse starts, an economic collapse, and so on. And in addition, it should be noted that every such attack and destruction of this or that target, whether it's a railway line or the shutdown, the stoppage of an airport in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, or anywhere else, means only one thing. Russia loses huge amounts of money every day. Russia loses tens and tens of billions every hour. Every hour. And Putin has no money. His national wealth fund is practically depleted, and all his reserves are in Chinese yuan. But there's another point, Dasha. There's a huge problem there. It's clear that oil rubles aren't working. They're not working. Oil revenues have dropped by 30%. That's obvious. But there's another important, significant detail. It comes down to the fact that if Putin doesn't have money, he'll have to get it from somewhere. The only option he has to get this money is to take it from his more or less well-off population, from the middle class and above, who have 40 trillion rubles sitting there. In Russian banks, and for this reason over the past week, Russians have suddenly withdrawn their money from the banks. In just 1 week, Russians took 500 billion rubles, half a trillion, away from Vladimir Putin. Yes, so this is a huge story, absolutely, half a trillion. In other words, we're talking about the fact that Russians have sensed the country is in trouble, that Putin is going to trick them, that Putin will deceive them, that Putin will simply take and seize their investments, their money, their deposits, because he needs war, he needs to fight, he needs power, and to extend his rule through war. He dreams about this, he fantasizes about it, and accordingly, now he will do everything possible to get that money. Who will give him the money? No one except the Russians themselves. Do Russians want to give their money to Vladimir Putin? No. That's why those who are smarter are already taking theirs out. And who are the fools? They'll leave it there until the very last moment, and everything will burn. Putin will take all the deposits or freeze them, and never give them back. This is a very important point. This is more important than all the airports and all the railways, because for the first time, Russians have felt that the war hasn't just arrived, that you need to take your money, pack your bags, and get the hell out, or sit on your hands and wait for the right moment.
Yes. This is simply a formal campaign to wear down Russia's energy, economy, and logistics. Sasha, I can't help but ask you a question that our subscribers asked me to pass on. So they love our tandem, Sasha plus Sasha, Sasha plus Sasha, and they specifically asked me to pose this question on Independence Day. In your opinion, how realistic is the scenario where, do you remember that movie about Osama bin Laden, Zero Dark 30? And everyone discusses how realistic it is, because a war can end quickly if the number one target simply ceases to exist. In your opinion, is this a realistic scenario for intelligence agencies or not? Or is it a utopia?
No, look, for intelligence agencies, everything is realistic. For good intelligence agencies, and Ukrainian intelligence agencies are good ones. For the Americans, it's a very realistic scenario. The issue here isn't with the intelligence agencies. If the intelligence agencies were given the task, they would try to carry it out. That's not the point. Moreover, there have been assassination attempts on Putin. There have been several attempts on Vladimir Putin's life, acknowledged by the Kremlin. The issue is actually something else entirely. The point is, I think, first of all, that no one wants this kind of precedent to appear in the world. It's not about something like this happening specifically in Russia. The fact is, this makes both the West and the East very uneasy. No one wants something like this to happen, because many of them have skeletons in their closets, so they're all wary. But there's another even more serious point. Look, it seems to me that there is a person who is strongly opposed to such scenarios and who will defend Putin to the very end. And it's not about whether he likes him. It's not about boundless admiration. It's not about this person wanting negotiations with Putin and so on. It's just that he is oriented toward cooperation with Russia, and specifically with Putin. And that person is Donald Trump. And there's nothing you can do about it, and you can't change anything with Trump, at least for the next 3.5 years. Moving on. But what would I like to say? You know, while we are thoroughly discussing these very important things, it appears that Vladimir Putin himself, as far as I comprehensively understand the current situation, is actively planning a significant and aggressive attack on a completely new country, a sovereign new state. Moreover, logical deductions and intelligence tell me that a direct attack or a meticulously attempted attack on the esteemed leader of that particular state is also being carefully planned and orchestrated. And it's not Vladimir Zelensky, even though Putin has tried and I'm sure is still trying to target our president as well, in some way, to eliminate him, but he won't succeed. I'm talking about Azerbaijan and Ilham Aliyev. Ilham Aliyev recently made a statement that war is coming soon and that people need to prepare for it. And the only hope lies with the Azerbaijani people. In Baku, they understood perfectly well that as soon as they turned toward the United States, turned away from Russia, and allowed Trump and America to address the security issue in the South Caucasus, that after this, Putin would do everything possible first to destroy Armenia and reestablish his own power there, meaning Kremlin-backed power, and second, to destroy Aliyev and Azerbaijan. But in that case, the Kremlin would have to face the Turkish army. But this confrontation is inevitable because Turkey and Russia have fought each other more than Russia has fought anyone else. That's why I believe that in the near future we will see a major confrontation, a large-scale protracted war in the south, as a result of Russia's refusal to comply. We can already see that in Armenia, where the 102nd Russian military base is located in Gyumri, there have been protests. And the Armenians are trying to kick the Russians out of Gyumri, out of Armenia altogether. This is yet another flashpoint. That's why right now, if the war stops or is frozen or whatever happens, though I don't believe in that, but many are discussing exactly this scenario of Russia against Ukraine. Putin will immediately turn his attention. Having freed up enormous resources, he will immediately focus on the South Caucasus. That means Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. And I hope, I am even sure, firstly, that Turkey will not allow it, that there will be a long drawn-out war, and there will be a clash with Turkish forces. And secondly, who else won't allow this to happen? The Americans, Vladimir Putin. But the fact that this scenario, in my opinion, is inevitable and that it needs to be considered is a fact. That's something I would watch very closely, very diligently.
And right now, as you say this, there are protests taking place in Armenia against Russian military bases on the territory of that country. Friends, to sum up, we are attacking right now, as everyone is already reporting. Telegram channels are reporting a massive drone attack on Russia. Oil refineries in Syzran have been hit. There are explosions in various regions. The Moscow region, Leningrad region, Syzran, Belgorod, Kursk region, Kurchatov, Tver, Leningrad, Smolensk, and Bryansk. We are acting precisely, selectively, and are indeed attacking only military targets. Friends, please like this video. Sasha, the final word is yours as we wrap up today's stream.
Friends, I just want to wish all of us resilience, patience, and to do just one thing. Truly to endure, get through this, and keep on living. Because that will be, the most terrifying gift to Vladimir Putin from all of Ukraine, from each and every one of us. To live a normal life right after and to outlast Vladimir Putin and his regime. That's what I wish for all of you. Truly.
Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.